going to get, they stay, continue to be hiding? Are they going to be pardoned? I don't think it's up to us to say now. We have two examples in history. I mean, just in recent example. What happened in Bosnia, for example, all those who committed the, crimes against humanity are being tried. I mean, Karadzic, one of the most notorious killers of the Bosnian War, he kept hiding for over 16 years. And finally, he was catched, he was caught, and he's now in jail and he's waiting for his trial. Izzat Begovic himself, he was caught and he died in, I'm sorry, Milosevic, yes. Yeah, and again, Rwanda, those who committed the crimes are now either they are already received their sentence or waiting for a trial. But however, we have another example. What happened in South Africa? I mean, great leader like Nelson Mandela, he told his people, let's not forget, but let's forgive. And there was no atrocities. I mean, the people finally came together. How many white supremacists committed the crimes against the black majority? Unbelievable. But with a leadership like Mandela, he said, come on, let's open a new chapter. We don't want to go to the past. We want to forgive, but let's not forgive. And he created this Commission on Truth and Reconciliation and did work miracles. So it's not up to us to decide now. It's up to the Syrian people and what they decide for their own country.
Do you think the Syrian coalition under the chairmanship of Ahmed al-Jarba, along with the Syrian coalition, would forgive and deal with the issue as Nelson Mandela? Well, there was a comparison. The other part of the question, sir, is Catherine Ashton, the foreign minister of the European Union, said the Security Council should be held responsible for the atrocities and they should use all their efforts to stop the killing in Syria, or the Security Council should be held responsible for such actions. Let's take the two parts.
Right, and I think I agree with the last part of Lady Ashton's comment, is that really the main priority now is to stop the killing and then to negotiate a settlement. Accountability is important and could take place parallel to all of these efforts, but it's really not the most pressing now.
Most pressing is to stop the killing.
Right. I mean, trials could take a long time before the ICC, and even if you manage to catch them, Karadzic took years to catch him. So I think international justice is important, but now I think we have something that's much more pressing at hand. I am concerned about the negotiations on the chemical weapons deal between the United States and Russia, and of course the rest of the Security Council, because it could take one of two things. The inspection regime that will definitely be part of any deal could be cooperative, meaning it would rely on the cooperation of the Syrian government, and if that happens, or could be invasive and strict. If it is cooperative, that could lead legitimacy, it could lend legitimacy to the government, it could make it more difficult to negotiate a political settlement. As you probably know, the Syrian opposition wants to negotiate the fate of Bashar al-Assad. They don't want him to continue. The GCC has already declared that it considers the government of Bashar al-Assad an illegitimate government. It does not represent the Syrian people, and only the national coalition represents the Syrian people. So if of the deal that's now being talked about, I mean, it's not really negotiated yet, but if that deal is cooperative, relies on the good offices and good cooperation of the Bashar regime, then it will be difficult to negotiate its downfall at Geneva too, as the opposition wants. On the other hand, I think if the deal of the inspection regime that will result from these negotiations, that will be part of a UN Security Council resolution under Chapter 7, if the inspection regime is invasive and strict, meaning if it's under Chapter 7, means UN inspectors will go there and inspect without the cooperation, with or without cooperation of the Syrian government. I think that could weaken the Syrian government if they could operate everywhere in Syria without the cooperation of the Syrian government.
In
Iraq. Yes. And that could weaken the government and will not allow it to benefit diplomatically and politically from these negotiations. So I think it's really important what kind of deal that Kerry and Lavrov reach in the next few days.
Has to offer to the international community. Ambassador Mack, General David Petraeus, the former CIA chief, said that a refusal by the Congress of the or the denial of the president's request to retaliate against the Syrian regime would give power to Iran and North Korea, and said that the Congress or the Americans will pay for the consequences. How do you read, and not only the Middle East will pay the consequences, but the whole international community will pay? How do you read what has been said by Mr. or General David Petraeus, sir?
Well, this does explain why, for so many American members of Congress, there is now a willingness to move ahead, because the chemical warfare issue is one that doesn't simply affect Syria, where there is a civil war underway. We'd rather not be involved in that civil war as American people. We are very worried about some of the rebel groups who seem to be about as bad as the Syrian government itself. On the other hand, chemical weapons, there the issues are far more clear, because if we are unable to either destroy or gain control of the chemical weapons, that is, the international community gain control of the chemical weapons, then we lose all credibility with Japan and South Korea, because North Korea could use nuclear weapons against them.
Yes.
We lose all credibility with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, with other states of the Arabian Peninsula, and with Israel, because in theory, Iran someday could use nuclear weapons against them.
Yes.
So it is very important that we get a handle on this chemical warfare issue. Russia is also interested in doing this, and that has the #1 priority. The #2 priority is to get the political negotiations underway for a transfer of power to some new kind of Syrian government that better reflects the wishes of the Syrian people. And finally, the issue that you've been talking about with regard to justice against the war criminals, whether they're with the rebels or with the government. I would agree with your other panelists. Those are important issues, but they're issues that should be left to the Syrian people after there is an overall political agreement to end the fighting and get some new kind of transitional government.
Okay. Give you a short pause and we'll continue discussing the ongoing crisis in Syria and if there are any solutions in the foreseeable future. Welcome back to Political Agenda. Professor Sayyam, sir, in Syria, the red lines were crossed in many occasions, and even the American president spoke about it, all the European officials, the Arab officials, that all red lines were crossed. The reluctancy of the American president of attacking or retaliating against using the chemical weapons. Dr. Aluwaisheg a while ago said that might kind of strengthen the Syrian regime if the international community do not stand fully against those actions. In your point of view, and some people are accusing the American president of being reluctant. We remember during the Clinton era, the Kosovo, the Bosnia-Herzegovina, spoke about it a while ago, George Bush during Haiti, their father, and also during the Panama when they, so America sometimes acts very fast and furiously, but sometimes it takes them, and now it took them more than 3 years or almost 3 years, and they have not reacted. Why, in your point of view, the reluctancy of the American president or the American administration is there?
It's very simple, because Obama himself was elected as a president of the United States based on the premises of 3 important overriding goals.
Exactly.
As he promised the American people. First, he will salvage the economy, which was deteriorating so badly under the 8 years of the Republicans. So he inherited a very devastated economy, and he promised to fix that. And the second, that he promised the American people that America will not go to war, and he will conclude those 2 ongoing wars in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Afghanistan and Iraq, yes.
And the third promise he gave to the American people is to fix the health system. And he promised to have a universal health insurance for everyone.
The Obama health care.
So based on these 3, yes, the Obama health care. So in fact, he was elected among the most important thing that the American people approved, and they put Obama in the White House because he promised to conclude those wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he did. He kept his word. He concluded the war in Iraq, and that made him extremely popular. And he's about to conclude the war in Afghanistan. So this man is not a man of war. He is a man of peace. And he got the Nobel Peace Prize, just not because what he did, but because when he became a president, he promised what to do. It's the first Nobel that was given based on promises and based on intentions rather than achievements. So that is one important fact, that why Obama is reluctant. He doesn't want to go to war. However, because he spoke about those red lines on August 20th, 2012, and 1 year later he found that the Assad regime did cross these red lines, he found himself in a very hot place, in a corner. In one hand, he wants to keep his word about red lines and to punish the Syrian regime for crossing the red line. And on the other hand, he found that the American public is not supportive, the Congress is divided, and he wasn't sure that the Congress will vote in favor of such a military endeavor. So he gave a chance to the diplomatic channels, which is led by both Russia and the United States. So I think he is loyal to his own ideology of a man of peace. He doesn't want to go to war. The economy in America needs all these billions and trillions of dollars spent on wars to be spent in America, and that's what made him even more popular in the United States.
Okay. Dr. Aluwaisheg,
yes.
Sir, now we remember many missionaries, starting with General Dabi from Sudan to Syria, then Kofi Annan, he called a failure of his mission, then Al-Akhdar al-Brahimi,
right,
who's not believing that he has failed over the past few years or 2 years or more. He's still playing. The other day he was speaking to the media and he said, there is a long way in front ahead of us. In your point of view, how do you read the role of the United Nations? Ban Ki-moon held many press conferences saying that we are against what is happening in Syria, blah, 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 but there is no action from the United Nations Secretary General nor his envoy, and
right,
we have seen no results. As an Arab diplomat and Assistant Secretary General of the GCC, how do you read the mission of Al-Akhdar al-Brahimi and the whole United Nations in this dilemma?
Let's say in a word, failure.
Failure, yes.
And I think Professor Sayyam pointed out something very important, which is the continuous hesitation and reluctance by the American administration. It's understandable for political reasons. After Vietnam, the Americans were hesitant about getting into another international conflict for a long time until the Iraq war in 1990. So I think we're seeing that. There is fatigue among the Americans in getting another failed international mission. The Iraq mission was a failure. The Afghan minister is now a failure. There is really not many good examples of good intervention by the United States nowadays. I mean, that's how people think, because they don't think about the successes that you mentioned before. On the other hand, with the reluctance of the American to lead the effort, because you really need American leadership in this, you see firm support by the Russians for the Syrian government. Exactly. And here, this is the only time I think I will disagree with David, in that the Russians, although in theory they supported the conventional chemical weapons convention, in fact, they have stood by Bashar al-Assad as he used chemical weapons time and again. David Cameron said that the Syrian government used chemical weapons 14 times. He said that in his speech before the House of Commons. So the Russians stood by Bashar al-Assad, first denying that chemical attacks had never ever taken place, and then they said if they took place, then sure that Bashar al-Assad didn't do it. It was the opposition. Only now they're admitting implicitly that he actually was involved. Also, the Russians, in fact, used chemical weapons in Moscow itself. In 2002, if you recall, the attack by the Chechen terrorists on Dubrovska, on the theater. And the theater. Yeah, yes. and the Russian forces pumped gas that nobody knows the name of this gas, what kind of gas it is until today. And 170 people were killed in that attack. So I don't think the Russians are squeamish about using poisonous gases on their own citizens. So on this special occasions, I don't think they're squeamish about using it in Moscow. Why would they be squeamish about using it in Damascus? So I don't see sincerity on the part of the Russians to stop Bashar al-Assad, whether he used chemical weapons or conventional weapons that are made in Russia. So I don't think the Russians are playing an honest broker. We have to really rely on American leadership in this, not the Russian leadership.
Okay. David Mack, sir, I'm speaking to David Mack. Is any country is going to wait for what the American president or the American elect president, they're going to listen to his first speech and they're going to act? If he says, I'm not going to go to war, then they might attack their own people, because America or the American president is looking for peace and he's looking for a Nobel Prize. Or
the second one.
Or the second. Or, sir, do you think the American president has to follow what the American public says in every time? In many occasions, we have seen the American administrations taking actions against the will of the public because they thought it's against the the national security of the United States. Why now we are hesitant and reluctant after using chemical weapons in many occasions, and the people are being butchered every day? Why there are reluctancy, and what is the role of the American public?
Well, first of all, I want to say that you had very good analysis of the American political system and the reasons for Obama's popularity from Professor Sayyaf. And I also agree with a lot of the things that Dr. Aluwaisheg has had to say about U.S. foreign policy and the priorities of U.S. foreign policy. In answer to your specific question, President Obama would be willing and has been willing in the past, such as using drone attacks and capturing and killing Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. President Obama is prepared to use unilateral military force when he sees an urgent threat to the U.S. national interest. In the case of what's going on in Syria, there is a long-term indirect threat to U.S. national interests, but it's not so urgent, and it's not so clear to the American public that the president felt he could safely take unilateral action. He did know that the Russians did not want to see a demonstration of U.S. military power. And so, in a curious way, the Russians and the U.S., beginning with the conversation between Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg, have found a common interest in coming up with some kind of diplomatic framework for resolving this question of chemical weapons. And it enables both of them to show that they have been successful. It will enable the Russians to improve their relationships with Turkey and with the Arab world, maybe even with Israel. And it enables the United States to reestablish its credibility in the sense of being effective at combining diplomacy with great military strength.
Final statement.
And showing that they can get important political objectives and support their friends.
Ambassador David, I have only 1 minute. I want to give it.
Arab governments.
I will come back to you. Dr. Abdelaziz Aluwaisheg, how do we sum up this whole negotiations? We've discussed it over and over. Are you hopeful of a solution?
No, I think it's a major setback, the way it has been handled. First, President Obama talked about using force, and then he decided to consult Congress, and then he asked Congress to postpone the vote. So I think it's been mishandled, and unfortunately, I think it has been misread by the Syrian government.
Okay, Dr. Sayyam, in one sentence, sir, are you optimistic of a solution soon?
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that there will be a breakthrough through a negotiated draft resolution to be adopted unanimously by the Security Council in the next few days.
Dr. Abdulhamid Sayyam, Professor of Political Science at University of New Jersey, Radgov. Dr. Abdelaziz Aluwaisheg, Assistant Secretary General of the GCC for International Negotiations. Dr. David Mack, former Vice President of Middle East Institution, former U.S. Ambassador, and former Deputy Assistant for the Middle East. Thank you all. You have added value to the program. Dear viewers, we are hopeful that the coming days will have a solution for our brothers, the Syrians. If there are no solution in the horizon, then God help the Syrians, because they are butchered every day by massive numbers, reach to 1,300 in one day. On behalf of the Executive Director, Ubaidallah, Director Hayam Al-Kilani, Head of the Newsroom, Abdullah Al-Mansour, and Sultan Al-Sayyari, we all wish you a good night.